For the hatches here on the Black Pearl, we're going to be going with Beckson simple screw-out hatches, molded plastic. On the stern, there will be an 8-inch, which is acceptable because the deck back there is pretty flat, so it won't be that difficult to get it into there. Up front, we got to go with a 6-inch because in this area here, so I need to recess it down so that when it's done and in, that the top of the hatch sits basically flush with the deck so as not to catch too much water and spray as it comes back. So I've marked where the hatch is supposed to be according to plans, and it shows to be about right there, which seems to me to be quite a bit too much aft, in that most of the larger things that would go into the hatch would be fitting up in here. So I'm actually going to move it forward a little bit, maybe something in this area. You know, you like to be able to reach in and grab the bag from that side and that side. I know there's going to be small items that may go in the back. It's not really a touring style of kayak anyways, so I can't imagine they're going to be putting a lot of gear in here. But anything that gets stuffed down into the small ends of the boat, you know, may have to be bags on ropes that you can just kind of pull them out. I think for this, I will cut the opening maybe just 1/8 of an inch wider than this. So this will sit down into a recess. It's going to maybe be made out of plywood and fiberglass and epoxy. So we shall measure across the outside here is exactly 10 inches. So if I go with my calipers and draw 10 1/4, that'll give me 1/8 of an inch around the edge. We always need a little bit of extra just for sealing with epoxy. I don't want to be putting that in too tight, but I also don't want a big gap between here and the recess. That's just going to pool water. I mean, we can make it probably pretty close. I'm sure if I just actually put it down there and trace it and then cut outside the line, I can always make that hole bigger. We can get some tape and we'll mark that out. So I'm just using the 2 holes here to determine center, lining it up with the center on the center strip. If I just hold this down pretty tight, should be able to trace around there. Now I suppose I don't have to be as careful in cutting out this hole as I would in most kayaks I've built. The standard way that I do my hatches is we cut this out as cleanly as possible, and we're using the cutout as the lid, building a recessed lip, and the lid sits back down into there. I don't know, maybe he might decide that he likes those lids later. So I'm going to make a nice clean cut anyways, and we'll start by drilling a simple little hole on the line to get my jigsaw through. I'm using a very fine little blade. We can get through there. So before I do that, I always like to just kind of double check and measure, you know, are we at the widest point about equidistant from the shear? That's 3 inches, and that is bang on 3 inches. So I know I'm on center. So if we've cut that well enough, that should just drop in there with a bit of a lip, a little bit of an edge around there for epoxy filling. So the question is, how low? Because that lip there is pretty much the thickness of the cedar, so I really just need to build a lip underneath there flush with the underside. It should be easy to do out of plywood, sealed up with a fiberglass and epoxy. Here's the plan I'm working on for the hatches. That's the piece cut out. We're not using that as a hatch cover lid, not as watertight as going to be using the Beckson screw-out lid. So I need that rim to end up basically the height of the deck. Plan is to glue in a piece of ply under there, epoxy coat it, glue it all in, and then this will sit down and the screws will get attached to that. But I want these pieces to be perfectly flat. If I press them up into here, there is a very slight curve to the deck, so I'm actually going to glass both sides of these panels and lay them flat with some weight on it to make sure this piece is perfectly flat when it goes up inside. On the bow, it's a bit of a different story. This piece has a lot more curve to it, and yet I still want a flat surface in there. So just as a bit of a test piece here, if I bring this up, sort of centered and touching on the sides where it's the lowest, got quite a bit of a gap in here. So after glassing this panel on both sides, making it super stiff and straight, I'm going to lay it in here and I'm going to fill this gap with a piece of wood, which I'll be able to just kind of calculate. I might very well just glue the piece of wood into there and then shave it down so that this will lay flat. So when this ring goes in, it's going to be flush just on the sides, but not at the front and back. Now that I have the small piece of plywood fiberglassed on one side, I'm just going to trace out around the perimeter here of the actual deck fitting. Flip the deck back over and line up those marks with the outside of the hole as close as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect. Then I'm going to try and make some marks on the underside of the deck so I know where to glue it in. I'm going to draw the whole thing around, but I got marks. So when this goes down, like so, I'm going to be able to just glue that down, lined up with my marks. And then I will have to do the same for the bow, but that's a little bit different because there's a heck of a lot of curvature to the bow section. So when this goes in, we've got a massive gap here. And the question is, it's going to be the best way to fill that gap. I suspect with wood, and it has to be curved this way and curved to fit the deck. And even though it's touching the sides here, there's still a gap on the outer edge there. Not much. Now if I was to trim a little of the sides off here, it will drop down a bit lower. So maybe I'll do that. I'm going to just take a little at a time. It's fairly flush. I can take a little more off of there. Do here, just to be sure. Mark that. That's the bow, facing forward. So I thought we're a little bit closer to that side. I sanded down the surface here, allows me to draw on there. I drew out the actual pattern so that I can know exactly where this should sit on the inside. So I've got a good bit of lip overhanging all the way around. Now the question is how to hold it in there. I could just do it upside down and put some weight on it, or I can cut out some of the center here, not big enough for the actual recess to go in, but enough to get some clamps in around. So I know that the lip is about 3/4, so if I go 1 inch here and cut that out with a jigsaw. So I did a dry run just to see how many clamps I'm going to need to let in there. Not very many. Just going to take this out, mixed up my epoxy with silica and some graphite to match the black of the lid itself. So I'm just going to put a little around the outer edge here, and then hopefully whatever squeezes to the inside. I scraped down a little bit of the rough edges. I hit it with my orbital sander, and I'm just kind of cleaning up a little bit by hand here. And I want to get rid of all of the shiny epoxy on here because I'm going to put some fairing compound in here to kind of build a bit of a transition smooth. That's a little bit rough in there because I want to wrap some glass down onto the deck. So I think we're ready for that. We'll clean that up. Mix up some epoxy with some fairing compound and do that on the bow and the stern hatch. That filler is just not exactly thick enough. It's going to sag. I'm just going to have to let it sit for a while until it starts to gel up, maybe in half an hour or so, and then I can re-smooth it out. With a little bit of fill around the rough edge here, I've sanded it all down smooth, scuffed up everything, and I'm going to glass the underside of the lips of the fore and aft hatch with a layer of 4-ounce glass. And that should make it more than strong enough to hold any pressure of water or whatever. So I'm just going to cut out a bit of a circle here. Just want it to overlap onto the deck by 1/2 inch or so. With both sides of the hatch lip fiberglassed in place, it's now time to just cut out the actual opening so this will drop in. Get a little spacer and draw around 3/4 of an inch. I think that's going to be the better way to go. now have 3 coats of epoxy that has been blackened with the graphite on the hatch cover lips. So that's going to conclude this episode on building the hatches, because the rest will just be installing the actual Beckson hatches when the deck is done and the boat is finished and we're ready to outfit it and send it off to the customer. So thank you very much for watching. Hey, do consider please giving me a thumbs up on the videos on this series or other videos that I've got on my YouTube channel, and we'll see you next time.